Adam Rossi. Welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Thanks so much, John.
It's good to have you here. You're part of our After the Deal series, which is a series that we really try to dig in and try to help entrepreneurs understand what's around the corner. So much of their effort is going to be at this stage of the game until like, how do I get through due diligence and how do I sort of, maximize my negotiating leverage? But at the end of the day, they're going to come to a day where there's a signed share purchase agreement and they're going to give away their baby. And I know that's something you've gone through in a very big way. You had a very large exit, which triggered, generational or a massive amount of money that will be life-changing for you and your family. And I'd just be curious to know, how did that impact your life? What happened?
Yeah, this is one of those things where until it happens, it's really hard to understand what it's going to feel like. And you get a bunch of advice from people and they say, you're in for all these potential negatives. And all you can say to yourself is, come on, there can't possibly be many downsides. And then when you live it, you say, wow, it was bittersweet. And there was a point in my life where I wished I could just undo the whole sale process. The negatives were outweighing the positives for a while there. And it's taken years to get back to where I would say, I'm glad I actually went through with that transaction.
Wow. I'd love to unpack all that. Let's start with the positive. So you signed the share purchase agreement. Do you remember where you were when the money hit your bank account? Do you remember refreshing your internet banking? You're like, where were you when the whole thing went down?
It's a really funny situation when that happens. So we, my wife and I were the owners of this company, 100% owners. And we jointly decided, it's the classic story. If you talk to an investment banker and you say, look, we don't want to sell this company. And they say, well, if there's a number out there, would you say yes? Would you be forced to say yes? And we threw out a number that seemed absurd. And he's like, I can get that. And we said, who knows? And then he said, I got it from Northrop Grumman. I got it from SRA International. Right. I have 5 offers at that number or more. So the answer is yes. Right. And it's kind of like, oh, I don't know. And so so it's almost a half-hearted sale process. And so when the moment happened, it was funny because their SRA's in-house counsel and everyone said, okay, we're, all I's are dotted, T's are crossed. We're transmitting the money. And then they call back and said, the wire failed. And so our banker, JP Morgan, who's still our banker, had created 2 accounts and then canceled one. Right. And so it was just one of these things where it was kind of like, okay, the wire failed, what's going on here? And so it eventually got resolved. And yeah, it's one of those things where I've always been wired this way. When something good happens, I let myself kind of enjoy it for a brief moment, and then I try to get back to normal. And when something bad happens, I let myself feel bad about it for a brief moment. I try to get back to normal. And it's kind of like when I'm coaching basketball, I always tell the kids, hey, you feel great right now, but just moderate how you feel. And so, yeah, it was cool for like a day. And then after that, it was kind of like, okay, what does this mean?
So many questions. I think you mentioned you were a reluctant seller. And if the banker could get you your magic number, then sure. Help me understand that more, because there is a proactive stance you have to take, which is to hire the banker in the first place. So
Correct.
What caused you to hire the banker? And if you weren't really 100% sure you wanted to sell, why hire a banker?
Yeah. So what happened was, our company wrote software for law enforcement and intelligence agencies. And post 9/11, it was a roller coaster just of, we got to catch the bad guys. We had people, forward deployed engineers in Iraq and Afghanistan. We had, you'd flip on the news and you'd say, oh, we're part of that right there. They just got that bad guy. We played a role in that. I'm going to go testify in court against that person. Right. And so you had this kind of feeling of, of excitement. And then as these things dragged on for, a decade, I started to get this feeling that, what am I doing? Is we had all these big kind of impacts, and now it feels like we're just kind of going through the motions, and there's always, lawyers and bean counters, and it became much more of a bureaucracy and a battle. And
hey, it's John. Look, if you're building to sell, I want to let you know about a resource you may find helpful. It's called the Value Builder Score, and it will evaluate your company in the same way that acquirers will look at your business. It'll give you a score on the 8 factors that drive the value of your company. You'll also get an estimate of value and things you could do to improve that value over time. Whether you want to sell now or in a decade from now, knowing how the movie ends, I think, puts you in the catbird's seat, gives you all kinds of negotiating leverage. So it's available exclusively through a Value Builder advisor. So talk to your advisor. If you don't have one yet, you can go to valuebuilder.com/score. Let us know what industry you're in, and we will connect you with an advisor who specializes in companies like yours. Just go to valuebuilder.com/score. How big were you at the time, like revenue-wise?
I'd rather not say revenue. We had 250 employees that were, kind of the highly paid, top secret cleared, senior software engineers with a lot of specialty in things like code breaking algorithms, image recognition algorithms. So we were a very, very highly paid, highly specialized company. And we're pretty big, right? I mean, we were winning head-to-head competitions routinely with Lockheed Martin.
Wow.
And so that was our number one competitor, and we would kick their ass left and right in our domain, if you will. And so it started to feel very bureaucratic, and that's really what got to me personally. I won't speak for Lila, my wife. She was, I think, more... it was more like for her, I think she was like, if your heart isn't into this, then I'm with you. But I don't think, the kind of mission impact was maybe getting to her as much as it was me.
At what point, did you and Lila, your wife, have conversations about your exposure and lack of diversity as you're building this company, 250 employees? Again, I'm just reading between the lines. This is a business worth many, many millions of dollars.
Yes.
Did you and your wife say, hold on a second, if this thing goes pear-shaped, like, we're kind of screwed here because we're both tied to this one business? Did you guys talk about that at all? We
did. And, the unfortunate thing is I didn't have a lot of financial sophistication at the time. And so we had a account at SunTrust, the local branch, that had millions of dollars in it for our company, right? And our personal net worth was zero, right? I mean, we would take, for years, I took a $30,000 salary because my accountant said, if you take any less than that, the IRS will not believe it, right? And so we went from this kind of like the company has all of 100% of our net worth is our company, right? And there was a time where Lila said, hey, my friends were talking about something called a 401k. And I said, oh, that's not for us. This company is our 401k. Don't worry about, it's all here. And so we had no financial diversification. We had nothing to fall back on. And one of the things that I would advise someone now is if you're worried just about diversification of finances, I don't think that's a good enough reason to sell your company. There's all sorts of other ways you can solve that, right? You can do a partial sale. You can recap the company. There's just ways you can say, okay, I've taken this off the table, and if everything goes wrong, I have, right? There are ways we could have done that. I just didn't really know about them at the time. And so that factored in, but it was more just my heart, the mission. Do I love what I'm doing? Do I leap out of bed like I used to, which would just be like, we got to do this for the good of the country? And the answer was no. And so, yeah, the taking all the eggs off, taking some chips off the table, the the feeling of the mission. There are a couple factors. And then there was this reality that we would get approached by large companies in the defense sector all the time to sell the company. And I would always say, we're not interested. And we had offers unsolicited from a who's who of publicly traded defense contractors. And so those combination of things where you've got people just all the time, knocking on the door, led us to go talk to a investment banker. And it was more exploratory, right? It was kind of like, is there a market? Does it make sense? What was there an appetite? And it was kind of like the answer came back so quickly and positively that it just kind of swept us up.
And so you went through with it, selling the business. And again, I think in your own words, you were sort of tempering your reaction to it. Let's not get too high here or too low.
Yeah.
Let's kind of temper the reaction. Was there a temptation, though, to celebrate? I mean, this is a big win. Like, I get the fact that you're trying to keep it even keeled, but there must have been something that you kind of looked at each other and said, we've just built this enormous company and done what 0.0001% of the population has ever achieved. So
the weird thing about, my wife and I met when we were both negative equity, right? I mean, we both had $35,000 each roughly in student loans, didn't have a pot to piss in. My wife is not a person that has ever wanted, designer handbags or lavish lifestyle. She wants experiences for our kids. She wants, so we were already doing and kind of living the lifestyle largely that we wanted. We still live in the same house, from before we sold the company. Right. I mean, and so there was no big, hey, because we sold the company, we're going to do X. And I think the reality is, for a lot of people that I talk to that say, I want to sell my company because I want to be able to do these things, I always say, can't you do that right now? And they're like, actually, I probably can. It's like, I always wanted to sail around the world. Well, go sail around the world and then, keep working if that's what you were. Right. I mean, it didn't really trigger a lot of differences in our lives. And plus our kids were really young. And so you're not going to just say, all right, it's party time, right? When you got 3 little kids.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, it didn't do a whole lot. And I think part of the advice that I received that was good advice was, give it a year and don't go crazy with kind of buying, fancy cars you think you need to buy because you're now wealthy, or, a brand new house or a jet, or, so we all purposely didn't go through any big kind of purchases right afterwards.
Did you buy yourself any trophy?
I mean, I think the only thing that you'd probably point to is we bought 550 acres of timberland on the Shenandoah River, which is cool for me, but it's not exactly what people might think of as a trophy, right?
What was that? Why was that important to you? What was it about the timber farm or timber acreage?
For me, it was just, I love the outdoors, and we lived in the beltway of DC, and I felt like I would probably want to move into a more rural area. I grew up in a rural area of Southwest Virginia, and my wife was from this area, Annandale, Virginia, and wanted to stay. And then we had a family member with some health issues and we needed to stay. And so it was kind of a compromise where I said, okay, I can stay in the same area, but when you go out 45 minutes west to the Shenandoah River, it feels like the Appalachian Mountains, right? I mean, it's a very, very different area than DC. And so I spend probably 3 days a week out there every week, just doing stuff out in the woods.
So you sell your company, you buy the acreage. What next? I mean, you're a young guy, young kids. What was life like after selling?
Yeah, I was 39 when we sold the company. And so definitely young. And, the thing that everyone warned me about that happened to me too is the every day is Saturday phenomenon, right? Where Saturday is great. then tomorrow's Saturday and it's great. And then the next day's Saturday and you call your friends and you say, do you want to do this? And they're working, and okay, it's not Saturday for the rest of the world. Right. And so, we had that weird adjustment period, both Lila and I. I think Lila was able to focus a lot on the kids. And I was also, because, so to take a step back, I really didn't want an earnout in our deal, because I just felt like I haven't worked for anyone else since I was 23 years old. I don't want to work at a big company, and I don't want to be forced to. And I'd heard a friend of mine who had a terrible earnout situation where they essentially said, you'll sit in that office for the next year, whether you like it or not. And so he just went in every day and read a book, right? It was an adversarial. It's like, okay, I'm physically here, but I won't contribute anything, right? I mean, and it sounded terrible. SRA was a great company in that they said, look, you don't want an earnout, that's fine. You don't have to do anything post-sale. But what happened was they were bought by private equity almost immediately after they bought my company and taken private. And so I was very, very busy with just this swirl of kind of my employees saying, what the heck? We thought we were going into this, smaller publicly traded company that's kind of, has this reputation of being the steady Eddie and not really changing a whole lot. And now all of a sudden everything's changed. The CEO changed, the benefits have changed, the organizational structure is getting changed. They're merging in CSC and dying.
Why are they calling you? You're gone.
I was still there. And
okay. Not an earnout. You're just
not an earnout. I was just an employee. And I was just saying, okay, the CEO that just bought my company just got retired and replaced by this other guy. And I can't just leave right now. I need to make sure things are okay for our customers and my employees. And I need to kind of manage this chaotic swirl a little bit. So I ended up working for the company for maybe a year and a half after that. I mean, it was a long time, to the point where people were saying, what the hell are you doing? I thought you sold your company. You're working, twice as hard on this deal now. And it's kind of, I don't want that, $1 billion contract to get screwed up. We need to bring it home, So I think I had a little bit of a delayed reckoning because I was still busy, people. And then when I finally left, it gets so quiet. That's, I think, the major thing that people have a hard time adjusting to, right? You go from 100 person interactions a day to, 10 or 15. It's a big.
Hey, Lila.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's a big adjustment. And, I had a lot of just kind of a lost feeling a lot of days. I would say, well, I always like to learn new skills and read and do these things. And you'd go to pick up a book at like 1 p.m. and I would feel this intense guilt, which is still kind of present to this day of, should you be reading a book right now at 1 p.m.? Is that really, okay to do? And I would tell my, internal mind, well, this is a business book. It's like, it's not good enough. Should you really be doing that? So, yeah, I mean, I think there's this crazy adjustment, which caused me to finally say, okay, I need to buy a company and try my hand at manufacturing in these different industries. And I want to do, real estate development. I started getting more active, kind of made some mistakes there. And now I've finally, I think, hit a point where some days I say I'm overscheduled and I'm angry with myself. And other days I have a fully open schedule, or the weather's nice and I just say, I'm not doing any of that stuff. I'm going out to the farm. And so I think I finally hit that sweet spot, but it took 10 years to get there.
Wow.
It was hard.
Yeah. And our listeners are kind of on the front end of that, right? They're maybe they're evaluating an LOI right now, or they're kind of going through the T's and C's of a share purchase agreement. And it's life-changing money that they've been striving for many years, maybe decades. And I'm grateful for you sort of sharing how the movie ends a little bit, for sure. So you're in this process of helping the new CEO that's been sort of parachuted in by the private equity group to kind of navigate things. What was that relationship like?
So luckily he was a great guy. I really liked working with him. I think it's just really odd where you go into a company with thousands of employees and you feel like this is a very stable environment for my employees. They're going to like it. We know, that the defense head is this person, and my people will be reporting to them. And for the law enforcement stuff, they're reporting to this person who I like. And then all that changes, and you have this CEO that's coming in and saying, hey, I don't really know what happened in the past. I just know these are the things that we need to do. I think he had the right attitude, which was not, it's my way or the highway. I'm coming in and I'm cracking eggs and I'm collapsing these things because they don't make sense. I think he took a pretty thoughtful approach to it. And I would say that's the reason I hung out so long, right? Is everyone was generally nice, heart in the right place, good attitudes. And I think it's probably a lesson for when folks acquire, a company that, you can often, I have friends who had an earnout, a 2-year earnout and are still working at the place 10 years later because they just ended up liking it. It was a good fit. And that can happen sometimes. I think the other kind of lesson that I had they were so, this is probably unheard of in terms of a company making a deal, but SRA said, we'll give you 100% stock, 100% cash, or any combination there in between that you want.
Wow.
And their stock, at the time I wasn't a very sophisticated investor. I just pulled up a chart of the stock price on, Yahoo Finance. And I was like, whoa, this stock doesn't really move a whole lot. It's kind of been at $16.50 a share for, a long time. I think I probably just want all cash. And so I said, guys, I hope this isn't insulting, but I'm just going to take all cash. They said, no problem at all. And when they were acquired, I think it was acquired at don't hold me to this, but I think like $30 a share, right?
Wow.
Taken private at that price, right? It was a big premium. And so obviously if I'd said, look, I'll take 25% in stock, would have been a huge second bite of the apple. And I think whenever I hear folks that are structuring a sale deal, I always talk about trying to maintain some ability to get a second bite there, because I have so many deals now. I mean, mine was a fast example of it, but maybe, not like a 6-month outcome, but more like someone sells their business, they maintain some ownership. Maybe it's a 10% ownership stake, and that 10% goes on to become worth more than the entire 90% exit price that they first received, right? Just maintaining some skin in the game, some ownership, even if you're not there anymore, I think makes sense. And obviously, hindsight's 2020. I wish I had as well.
Yeah, we've seen both sides of that coin on this show. We've definitely heard of people maxing out. Matt from Crash Champions talked about that. Adam Coffey talked about that, the private equity playbook. We've also seen the flip side, though, where whatever they roll goes to zero. So it's one of those things where it's at risk. So buyer beware. But in your case, you took all cash and kind of rode off into the sunset. You used the word guilty, and I find that so interesting. And it was one of those words that resonated with me. We're just coming off a long weekend as we do this interview in Toronto, and there were times during the weekend I felt guilty, right? Like I was just kicking around. I flipped on the baseball game. I was kind of, well, I've got that thing I should probably do, but and just you using the word guilty really triggered for me. It was like, yes, I do know exactly what he means. Do I need to work on a Sunday? Probably not, but I did feel a little guilty. And I wonder how and if you've sort of learned anything about yourself that, because again, let's call a spade a spade. You didn't need to work again. Like there was no kind of material reason that you would need to work at 1 o'clock on a weekday, yet you were sitting there reading a book feeling guilty. Have you gotten underneath that at all?
I mean, I think when you're building a company and it takes so much of your personal identity, and it often requires so many hours of our time, so many sacrifices on weekends, so many sacrifices on holidays. You become locked into a way of living with that, right? Where Christmas, kids open some presents, everyone's happy. Now I'm going to go sneak over and start working on my laptop because we got to ship this module on Monday, and I need to get after it, right? And you get locked into to that way of life, and I was kind of perversely proud of it, where I now know I really shouldn't have been so proud about working 20 hours a day. I used to listen to this rock station on the radio when I'd work at night, and they would do like tickets, like ninth caller wins tickets. And I would always win them because I was like the only guy awake, and just feel like, hey, I won tickets to Ozfest and I can't go,
Here I am running a 250 employee company, and I'm like,
yeah, it's just to like talk to another human at like 3 a.m. as I'm sitting there working, right? So
that's really funny.
So you get used to like living like that, and then you get proud of, hey, I don't need to sleep a lot. I work I work hard, and I had that reputation. And when you then say, okay, now I'm not working at 3 a.m. anymore, but now I'm not working at 3 p.m. I mean, it just becomes such a stretch mentally. It's hard to put it away and stop kind of hounding yourself over it, right? I mean, it's kind of like, I had a grandmother that went through the Depression, and she would, if we went to McDonald's and you didn't eat the entire bun of the hamburger, she would say, can I have that? Then she would get your cup just with ice in it and just take it with her. Be like, Grandma, what? She just could never get out of it, right? It was stuck in her head that, hey, this bread and this ice might come in handy later. And I think it's the same way with entrepreneurs and working, where, yeah, you feel guilty because it doesn't feel productive. It's like, if I'm not productive, what value do I have? Which is something you have to just get out of your head.
What was your home life growing up?
I had so my grandfather and father both owned construction companies, and my grandfather owned a construction company up in Torrington, Connecticut, that did kind of highway construction. And then my father, that business kind of fell apart, and it's a whole story about siblings that didn't agree to the ownership. And so my father said, we're moving to Virginia, which was like shocking to my entire New England family, right? Moves us down to Virginia, and he starts a construction company from nothing. And so we grew up in this weird environment where it was total, if dad had $10, he could either buy us shoes or buy, a new tire for his backhoe, and the backhoe got the tire, it was, and so me and my three siblings, I've got two brothers and a sister, just grew up in this kind of company owner household where we're all sacrificing for this thing, and someday we're going to pave the driveway, kids, and which never happened. My entire life, the driveway never got right. But someday we're going to have these nice things, and just didn't quite materialize.
How did you choose to tell your dad about the sale?
I called my dad and told him just bluntly, I sold the company, and he was, quite frankly, very disappointed in me. I think he said something like, "Oh, I guess you're selling out, huh?" So not the typical response from a parent, I guess, if they saw that the news headline, right? But from his point of view, I mean, his identity, I think, is to this day so tied up with being a business owner that I think for him it was just an alien concept, that you would willingly choose to become a non-business owner.
Have you thought about how that role model in your life may have impacted the sense of guilt that you felt at 3:00 in the afternoon opening a book?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's all part. I think it's one of those things where my wife didn't have that kind of multi-generational business ownership tradition in her family, and I think that was probably an easier thing psychologically to help her say, look, I went from being an important person that owns a business to not being. And I think her adaptation was faster and easier than mine because of that. So it's one of those things where it helped to start the business because I said, when I first started dating my wife, we're boyfriend, girlfriend, I said, hey, there's something you should know about me. I'm going to start a business as soon as I, am out of this. We met in grad school. As soon as I get my MBA, I'm only going to work for someone else for a max of 2 years and I'm starting a business. And she was like, okay, great. It wasn't really her mission, but she's like, hey, if you're that into it, I'm into it, So I think it helped her on the other side saying, hey, I got what I wanted out of this. This was a huge success and it's everything we dreamed of and I'm good,
I'd love to talk about how you navigated wealth with your family and your spouse. We had James Ashford on the show maybe 3 or 4 months ago. He sold a software business based in the UK and he grew up in very modest circumstances. And he told a story that I'll always remember. He said, like when I grew up, we just went to the local school. There was no choice of where you sent your kids. That's where you went because nobody had any money, right?
Right.
And so when he had kids, they did the same. They were struggling and trying to get this business off the ground. He had 2 kids and he sent them to local school. Sage walked up and wrote him a big check for his company, big UK-based software company, mm-hmm. and he said it had profound impacts on his relationship with his wife because for the first time they had decisions that they needed to make. And of course, he acknowledged the same thing you did at the beginning of this, which is like, these are first world problems when you're worried about all this money. But he said, look, it's a real thing because all of a sudden my spouse and I are talking about like, where are we going to send our kids to school? And now there's choice and choice leads to a lot of difficult conversations about values and about ethics and about, so I think it was James who wanted to send his kids to private school and his wife was like, under no circumstances are we going to do that. And it was just this really tumultuous thing. And that kind of played out in lots of different areas of his life. And I hadn't thought about it before. I just wondered from your perspective with Lila, given her background and yours, like how did this impact your own relationship with each other?
I think the main thing in a marriage. So I've seen a lot of married couples that have successfully worked together, built businesses together, stayed married together. I've seen, unfortunately, friends who grew apart and have had divorces. I think the major thing that gets folks into trouble is when they have a fundamentally different view of how they want to, why they want money in the first place, right? And so if one person says, I want to live a lavish lifestyle, that's why I want to be wealthy, and another person says, I want to provide new opportunities for my kids that I never had, it's a different, those are different goals. And so they can kind of talk past each other and say, yeah, we'll do everything. We'll do all that stuff because we're going to make money, right? And then you start to get into it. It's kind of like, you're going to spend what on a fancy, whatever. I don't agree with that. I fundamentally disagree. I mean, you hear the classic thing of a husband or wife, complaining about how their partner's out of control with spending, right? Totally. Even though they have a lot of money, right? Yeah. It's like, and so thank God for me, Lila and I have always been on the same page with why did we want money in the first place? It's for kids, for family, for experiences, for education, for these things that don't really involve a flashy kind of lifestyle. And I am also very glad, quite frankly, that we kind of came from the same, less than zero net worth, and one didn't meet the other when one had money, and right. I mean, we were kind of we started from such a similar position. We have such a similar view of things. I think the difficulty comes from the thing I said about having people that then start to spend in wildly different kind of buckets, and family pressure, right? Which is, one person may come from a large family, one person might not, that has a lot of pressure about kind of share that money, and I need this, and the other person might, have a different view. And so there's this, well, it's the pressure to have that happened. And I think we avoided it. I had a family member that said when we sold the company, so we each get $1 million, right? Like that's kind of, that was their understanding of how this money would be divvied up, right? And we're talking, this is an extended family member. So this is a lot of people, right?
What?
And yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And I was put in the position of saying, no, I mean, we're, if someone has a medical issue, we're there for them. If someone has issues where they, they got to sell the other house before they buy the new house, and they need a little money to get right. Like we're there for all those things, but not to just equally distribute what we worked for. Right. I mean, and it was, so
I think you said no, but like, did that?
No, I mean, we're okay with them. I mean, I think whenever someone has an exit, they're tested by family members in certain ways, and everyone watches how that person reacts to it, right? And it sets the precedent for how things are going to go for decades after that. So I think you need to be very, very careful about, hey, I'm buying, all my siblings a sports car, to celebrate, because okay, you've got 4 siblings, but you're going to have nieces and nephews someday, and you're right. It's kind of like, do they get a sports car too? So I think again, luckily, I think Lila and I navigated that well. What I've seen in other folks' situations are, one family may have a tradition of kind of sharing, or and the other one is more individualistic, and so you've got kind of collective versus individual, right? And so there's different demands, and if one spouse says, well, I've got to give these people all houses and stuff because that's what's expected of me, it's not your tradition, so you don't have to if you don't want to. That other partner's kind of saying, this isn't a 50-50 thing anymore. I mean, all that money's going to your extended family and not mine.
But it doesn't sound like even in Lila's case, you had that. We were pretty much aligned.
We were totally aligned, and it hasn't been an issue for us. But I could easily see how that happens.
It strikes me as you and Lila share this view. You're super aligned. It's not about fancy purses and fancy stuff. You took a year before you spent any money. You bought an acreage, but it wasn't like a lavish thing. I guess there's part of me that wonders, okay, so like, if you're not doing anything with the money, like what's it all for?
So this is something I think about all the time. And, we've flown private twice. And it was awesome, you don't have to go through airport security, and you just roll up to Dulles private terminal and stick your duffel bag in, and you go to your destination. I mean, it's amazing, right? And really, like, we could fly private a lot more than that if we wanted to, right? I mean, it's just, for us, it's not that for us, there's there's the novelty of it, but it's not something that we necessarily want to become accustomed to. And just the way, our friend groups and peer groups, if that's not the norm there, it's kind of awkward to say like, all right, we'll meet up, from our private plane. Right. And so, I think the peer group kind of controls that to some degree, but also, I just think, and I did hear a funny comment recently where someone said, if you don't fly private, your son-in-law will. But, I briefly considered, just like everyone else, hey, I should buy like a kick-ass sports car, something way over the top. And then I start to think, because I'm a nut about maintenance and, I need to make sure I maintain it properly. And can I find a guy that will work on a car like that? And can I do it myself? Can I even change the oil in something like that? I don't know. And then, if somebody door dings it at the Safeway, will I get angry about that? Yeah, for sure. I'll
Have some sort of road rage incident.
Well, no, just it's one of those things where you start to say, okay, there's a bunch of worry that I'll probably, or just hassle or inconvenience. And I just know myself, the novelty of that wears off so quickly that I should probably not do it. Right. And I've had so many people say like, my brother's a car guy. My brother-in-law's a car guy. They're like, hey, I found this car for you. And I'm like, man, that looks awesome. I'd love to drive that for like a week. And then after that, I don't know,
So back to my question though, you're not a car guy. You didn't splurge on the fancy car. So what's all the money for?
Well, what I believe is we all want to cover the basics of shelter, security, food, education
Needs, yeah,
for our kids and our family. Right. And so you got that covered, right? That's well covered. And then you want to have experiences and adventures and travel the world, which we do. So that's covered. And then there's money left over. What do? Do you just start buying stuff? Do you start donating it? Well, we're pretty philanthropic, but we found that wasn't as easy as we thought to. You think like, okay, well, giving away money should be easy, right? And some of them work, and other ones you say, hey, I just wrote a check for an obscene amount of money, and that was squandered by that organization. I saw no real tangible work product come out of the money that we just gave them. It just kind of went into a black hole of administration. And so, there's all these things that, let me take a step back. I think it's hard to know for a lot of folks, the amount of money that they really need to be happy. And it's for a lot of people, probably a lot less than they would imagine. And when you get more than that, it's not necessarily obvious what to do with it, right? I don't want to just hand it to my 3 kids and screw them up. I want to, provide them kind of life experiences and a strong base that they can be good stewards of some of this money, but not just, burden them with a bunch of money. Mm-hmm. Want to be philanthropic, but we found that the big checks don't do as much as the small things. And so every year we're doing the smaller things, and it's more about trying to help our family stay close, help our family thrive, help our community through a bunch of mentoring, coaching activities that I mentioned before, and then be philanthropic for things that really move the needle for folks. And the remainder of that, is probably not going to go into like collectible cars or something. I don't know what's going to happen with the remainder, but I've got this funny story that I think about all the time where, you mentioned EO. I was in YEO as a young entrepreneur, and I was in a forum. And, EO is very valuable, I think, from a forum perspective, because it was at the time where my company barely qualified to become a YEO company. It was $1 million in revenue. And when I first heard that, I was like, it might as well be $1 billion, because I'm never going to be in this club, right? And then we somehow kind of eked out, like if you squinted, it could kind of be $1 million in revenue. And I joined a forum, and I had a friend who was going to an EO event in a limousine. So him and his wife, it was like a black tie YEO event in DC. They rented a limo, And he turned to his wife and he said, isn't it going to be great when someday we sell the company and we can ride in a limo? And she goes, we're in a limo right now. He's like, oh yeah, you're right. Like you tend to think like the things I really want to do require all this money. It's like, actually, it probably doesn't,
Such a good point. And one we just had David Hauser, who's still Grasshopper, on the show last week, and he talked about the idea of reservoirs and rivers. And he said, like a river is like cash flow. It's like an operating company where there's money coming in, and stuff like renting a limousine for an evening is like no big deal because you've got cash, you can roll it in. A reservoir, it's really tough to start to draw down your equity and live off of your nut because it's obviously it's melting away. Did you experience any of that?
I think that's the challenge. If your lifestyle and your spending is such that you have to guess when you're going to die, that gets really kind of icky, right? Where you say, well, I could do this for another 20 years. Am I going to live longer than that? Maybe I should, right? So luckily, we're not in a position where, Lila and I would have to be very, very, very poor stewards of capital to worry about kind of how long we'll live. I will say this, that growing up being kind of resource deprived and not being able to qualify for any loans when we first started the company. When we first rented laptops from Dell, we couldn't even qualify for renting, 10 laptops for our employees, right? It was kind of like, we're good. Your credit is not there. You're gonna have to figure something else out. So I think when you're used to having that kind of mentality and then you get money, I still agonize over like an in-app purchase on my iPhone, right? I'll say, do I need to spend $10 on that GPS map? Maybe shouldn't I? Right? I start to think about it. And then I say, wait, why am I spending so much mental energy on this? Well, the thing is, because your nature is your nature, right? You're conditioned a certain way and it's kind of hard to get out of that. Yeah. So I think, having a reservoir that is sized, appropriately for what you think you and your family will need for the rest of your life does, cause you to make these kind of guesses about like current levels of spending. Luckily, we're in the situation where that's not really a pressing need, but I still worry about money sometimes.
Isn't that funny? Yeah. No, I get it. What was the most surprising thing that happened to you after the sale of your company? Again, our goal is to help entrepreneurs look around the corner and kind of illuminate what they might be in for, how the movie ends, so they can kind of get mentally and financially ready for that. I'd just be curious to know, like, that we haven't covered that you just found super surprising. Could be even inconsequential. It doesn't have to be some major revelation.
One of the things that I learned is, so dealing with, I mentioned JP Morgan, my bank. I started to go to some of their events for the private wealth group here in the DC area. And so you start to actually meet other people with some high net worth, right? Mm-hmm. Which wasn't really part of my circle before the sale. And I think one of the surprising things for me is there are groups of people who have become so used to having money that it is their total identity, right? Their identity is being a rich person. And they live in a constant state of fear. So in other words, I'm known as the wealthy guy. Maybe I inherited my money, wealthy lady, wealthy man, whatever. I have this high status at the country club, and I'm on these boards, and they secretly become so fearful that if some bad thing happens and they lose that money, that their whole identity is torpedoed, right? Will anyone like me if I don't have money anymore? And I'm not the important person on all these philanthropic boards, and right. So that was a cautionary thing for me to look at that and say, I never want to become that person. My identity is not being a high net worth individual. And most of the people that I enjoy hanging out with absolutely are not, right? And so it made me think I never want to become comfortable and have my identity be defined by some sort of bank account number. And I want to maintain my ability as a lifelong learner to never fear that if I had to just jump back in and do it all over again, that I couldn't, right? So if you get people talking honestly, they'll say, I might have gotten lucky this one time, and I don't think I have a second one in me. And therefore, I really have to be, so worried about market conditions and my investments. And I don't, I doubt myself now. So I've maintained myself where I'd say, look, if Lila and I got wiped out by some horrible calamity financially, our marriage would stay together. Our kids would still be fine and love us, and we would love them. And we would be able to live a lifestyle that wouldn't be that different. And I would figure it out. Lila would figure it out, right? We'd still be good. And yeah, so I think the other revelation is, and I heard one of your guests mention this on a podcast, previous podcast, where he said, look, there are rich people sitting on a private jet who are lonely and miserable. That is absolutely true. Shockingly true. Where I know some folks that are a little bit older than me, generally male, founders who have exited, whose marriage, for whatever reason, was negatively impacted by either how they behaved after the sale, or maybe all the stress associated with building the company, right? Get a divorce, the kids become estranged for whatever reason. I don't always know, there's a bunch of different reasons why this happens. And those guys have told me, not one, not two, but many, I would give it all back if I could just have that back, I mean, it's crazy the number of people who outwardly people would be very jealous of, but you have no idea.
Yeah, we have a couple of people in our life that are going through that right now, where they're doubling down on their business ventures, and privately, I do say, what's driving that? Because you have so much else going on, so many successes in your personal life, and why would you risk that for the next zero or the next tranche of wealth? It's a head scratcher for sure.
Yeah, I think some people, there's a lot of pressure when you exit to do something else. I mean, I can't tell you how many folks contact me and said, so what's the next thing, right? You're talking previous employees. Hey, what's the next thing? I'm going to join you at that. People that saw this as a great financial exit. And, I'd approached as, hey, did you want to invest in my company? No, not at all. And now I do. I'd really like to invest in the next one. And so there's a lot of pressure, I think, on people to do that next thing from external parties. And I think people get sucked into it, right? And it's an ego thing too, where, hey, I'm going to prove that I've still got it, and I can knock another home run out of the park again. And
it wasn't just luck.
I'm going to show, this is going to be another grand slam. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure to do something else.
Did you do something else? I mean, did you make that mistake of going into something else after you left the company?
My thing was, I was never going. So because my kids were young, I said, look, I am going to be there and be present in their life and not be working insane hours anymore. So everything I did after that was with the understanding that this would not be, more than a 20, 30 hour kind of commitment a week. And so I have bought manufacturing companies. I've done real estate development, built an assisted living facility, invested in a lot of companies as a limited partner, and but none of them have I let become kind of big drivers of my schedule. And my youngest is now 14. So, I've got a 19, an 18, and a 14-year-old. So we're kind of almost through that period that I really had blocked off and said, I'm going to do this a little differently than kind of when I was a kid and who had a father that was just, hey, I'll be at work for the foreseeable future. And that's the way it is. So yeah, I mean, I've done things. I've probably, they always say that the first thing you do after selling your company, that's the one you really, really, really have to be careful about, because you generally don't do enough diligence on it. That feeling of like, I got to do something quickly to satisfy the critics and, and the questioners about like, what do you do all day? Because you get that question all the time. Oh, well, I do this. I bought this company, right? That's the one you really, really have to. And I messed up that first one.
What'd you do?
Big time. I bought a manufacturing company that made commercial refrigeration equipment and had a significant operation in China, but with an all US customer base. And it was just, I didn't do enough diligence. I jumped into it, and it was, it's one of those companies where no matter how much better you operated it, it didn't really reflect a better bottom line financial outcome. And so at a certain point, I just said, I am swimming against the current here. I divested that company. And that was a classic example, I think, of had a blind person, looked at the books, they would have seen the challenges, right? I did not want to see the downsides because I just needed to do something pretty quickly after I got out of the situation with SRA. And so it was a mistake.
You mentioned earlier that you got invited to the JP Morgan Chase high value, high net worth,
right.
lunches or cocktail parties or whatever. And you came to the realization that there were some people who just define themselves by money, and like that, they had the rich guy or gal identity.
Yes.
I love that framing. I'd be curious, what was it that they said or did at those luncheons that made you realize their entire identity was wrapped around in being the rich guy in the room?
Well, I think, when you have, it's kind of like you go to a regular kind of dinner party in your neighborhood, and usually the first question is, what do you do? And if someone asks me that, I say I'm an engineer. So that's, I've got a structural engineering degree. You could say I was a computer engineer but I just say I'm an engineer. Because saying like I'm an investor makes you sound kind of, it's like, what do you mean you're an investor? But when you're at one of those events, everyone is kind of like, so when you start to do the small talk thing, it was a different world than I was used to. And instead it would be kind of like, what are you investing in? What are you, and so, and if for example, we were going through, a market correction, you would see these people almost panicked, right? It would just be like, oh my God, did you see, the market's down 20% this year. I don't know what I'm going to do. And you start to say, well, what are you so worried about? You're going to be fine, right? The market goes through corrections, and presumably you've got a diversified portfolio and you should be fine, right? But you can just see that they're so emotional about that bank account when they log in, and it's up and down and it's really affecting them. That's, I think, how I started to find out. And so I started to talk to my advisors, at JP Morgan about, their other clients and what are they doing, in this recession, for example. And I started to talk to other folks who are general partners who take on limited partners. And, when we had a real estate correction, I had a guy tell me, yeah, I've had clients threaten to kill themselves over the losses that we had in this real estate portfolio. And they're rich, right? It's just because they're seeing that, hey, that's threatening as I said before, my identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you just hear about it in all these ways where you find that people that should have been in a comfortable position actually have a lot of discomfort, and it centers around their ego and identity involving how wealthy they are. which is kind of a sad way to live, right? I mean, it's kind of like, hey, you're letting this asset now control your emotional state, right? Which is a poor way to operate, in my opinion.
Yeah. 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 It's a funny thing. I can't help but ask myself, I find that your background is really fascinating. Grandfather was an entrepreneur, had a family breakup. Father was an entrepreneur, but maybe didn't go as well as he'd hoped, or certainly had to put in a lot more hours than he'd hoped. You have this just unbelievable exit, and his reaction is like, so you sold out. I mean, it's been years now. I mean, what's the relationship like now?
Well, I think the relationship's good. And I think he probably still doesn't agree with selling the business, but has seen, I probably check enough boxes of other business, right? I own an aerospace company that makes ballistic and explosive shielding. And so he probably, that would satisfy his, check the box of my son owns a business and is an entrepreneur. And, my other brother owns a digital printing company in Richmond. So he's an entrepreneur. And, I think the one thing my grandfather told me when I was a kid is the best thing in the world you can be is an American business owner, because he was contrasting that with kind of the way it was in Italy. And now you're in the land of opportunity, and you've got kind of politicians and senators and people down here. And then right up here, you have an entrepreneur in the greatest country in the world, the United States, is the pinnacle, right? And so I'm sure he told my father the same thing. If he told me, I'm sure he was telling my father all the time. And, I internalized that. And I think I still probably say things like that to my kids, but without maybe the pressure for them to become entrepreneurs, right? I mean, just more. I think the sad thing about entrepreneurship is there's so much opportunity out there, but I think for a lot of folks, they just say that's not for me, right? It's not, it's for other people. It's for people that are born with a better situation than me or smarter than me.
Good idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Idea.
Right. I don't have an idea. And so, I think the shame of it is people that would otherwise have become amazing small business owners or entrepreneurs just don't even know it's possible. And so one of the things I thank my father and my grandfather profusely for is, I knew it was possible. Like, we lived it, right? It was not only possible, it was probable in my household. So, I'm very thankful for that, just to say, I at least didn't have that handicap of saying, business ownership, is that possible? Like, I knew it was possible.
What would you say if one of your kids said, Dad, I think I'm going to go work in the federal government?
I would quietly leave. No, I'm kidding. I'm a small government guy in DC, so I'm not popular at a lot of cocktail parties around here. But no, I mean, I tell my kids, life is the greatest mystery in the universe. You have one life that we know of. You have to do whatever makes you happy. If they said, I want to, work in the federal government, I'd say, great. If they said, I want to, become an artist, or I don't know, something that would be kind of the opposite of the way I'd say, great. If they said, I wanted to be an entrepreneur, great. My wife and I have really tried to not set any sort of pressure or guidelines or expectations. And so, for example, for the aerospace company that I own, I'm never telling my kids, hey, you're going to run this someday. Because, my father would kind of say things like that. And it puts, I think, a lot of pressure on kids to say, well, my parents expect me to run the family business someday, right? We've never done that with our kids. So they want to work for the federal government, great. I mean, it's have at it, man. Do it.
Adam, I think your kids are lucky, and I think quietly your dad's probably pretty proud of you as well. I appreciate you sharing all that you've done today. If folks want to reach out and just sort of say hi, is there a social media channel that they could do that on, or are you a LinkedIn guy? Or
yeah, I like X and I like LinkedIn. So on X, I'm at Rossi Adam, and I respond to DMs on X, and then LinkedIn. You'll find me Adam Rossi on LinkedIn, and I respond to DMs as well. And so, those are the two best places to reach me.
And we'll put both of Adam's coordinates in the show notes at builttosell.com. Adam, thanks for doing this.
John, thank you so much.